Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Today on the show, with it being Super Bowl week, we had the honor and the privilege to talk to Brent Jones. Brent is a three-time Super Bowl champion, three-time All-Pro, four-time Pro Bowler, and played 11 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. You might remember him as part of that team with Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and John Taylor and Tom Rathman and Roger Craig and even later with Steve Young. Brent was a big part of that offense and played for, like I said, 11 years with the San Francisco 49ers. And with San Francisco back in the Super Bowl, it was great to get Brent Jones on the show, talk about faith, talk about football. And interestingly enough, Brent's got some great stories about his time playing with the Niners, certainly playing in the Super Bowl, but also where the prayer on the 50-yard line originated from. Brent was a part of that. It actually started the very first time NFL players got together from both teams to pray at the 50-yard line began 30 years ago on a Monday night, 1990, in a game between the Giants and the 49ers. Brent was a part of that and tells us how that transpired and the backlash that he faced from the NFL for going to that 50-yard line and praying publicly after a football game. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm a bit of an NFL historian, so getting to talk to one of the legends who's played in so many big games like Brent Jones was a treat. Take a listen to our conversation with three-time Super Bowl champion from the San Francisco 49ers, Brent Jones, joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Brent, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Jason, thank you so much. Honored to be on.
It's great to have you back on. And I say back only because you haven't been on the show, but you were on the cover of, and we were looking back at this, the 1990 issue of Sports Spectrum. Same ministry, same group that's still doing this today. And it's been a while. I can't imagine 1990. When you think back to 1990, just kind of getting into that career, I think you had won back-to-back Super Bowls. Let's start there, I guess. Where was faith for Brent Jones? Certainly you were locked in on your football career at that point. But 30 years ago, at I guess the age of 27 maybe, where were you going when you think back to 1990?
So, Jason, great question. And really my faith journey started in high school. I was going to Young Life, became a Christian my sophomore year in high school, was a second-string football player, including, believe it or not, my senior year. I thought I was pretty good, but my coach thought I had work to do. I was more of a baseball player. And so without, my relationship with Christ in my life, I have 100% confidence that I would have never found myself in the National Football League.
That's awesome. Now, there's so many things to talk about with you, certainly over the years and your journey and your career. But let's kind of fast forward really quick to now as we're taping this. The 49ers are back in the Super Bowl, and they're facing, obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs back in Miami, of all places, which is a unique place and a special place for 49er fans, knowing that they've won a couple Super Bowls there. What was your reaction to seeing your former team once again as NFC champs?
It felt great. I had the opportunity to actually go out to the Bay Area and be there for the game. This team really has a great exuberance about it. There's a great locker room, a great connectivity of young ball players, and I think they've defied the odds. They were 4-12 last year, and they've come back and they've really put in the work and the effort, and had a couple of rookies impacting the team, and it's great to see. I actually am friends with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, and so to have a couple guys that you're connected to that succeed, it just makes it all the more fun to sit back and enjoy.
How involved are you today with the Niners? And certainly, I don't think, day-to-day working for them or anything like that. But in terms of being an ambassador, even a fan, are you watching the games every Sunday?
So I absolutely have been. I'm fortunate. I still have a radio show in San Francisco on Monday nights. And so I need to pay attention during the weekend. And this has been a team that's been fun to watch all year, I have to say. Subsequent years, watching some of those games was painful. Yeah. This year's team's been a lot different, a lot more exciting. particularly on the defensive side of the ball. You don't usually attach exciting and the defense together, but it's been a lot of fun to watch. And so I not only do I watch all the games, I think that all the guys from back in the day have kind of been brought together through this new organizational change. When they brought in John Lynch, he understood the dynamics of the tradition, of the legacy, and Kyle was a ball boy for one of our Super Bowl teams. And so knowing him at age 14, 15 years old really makes a difference. And so there's a lot of ambassadors right now. Of course, winning creates a lot of ambassadors all of a sudden as well.
Yeah, it's always, not shocking, I guess, when you're playing an NFC Championship game and you have a rich history of winning. And so you bring back all the names and you see Jerry Rice there and you see Joe Montana tweeting about it of all people. And there's you, and going to the games and all these legends. It's really wonderful to see. It must be a lot of fun for you knowing that the position that you play, the guy playing the position now for the 49ers, he's a pretty good one, George Kittel.
He's a great player, and it's a treat to watch him. And what he does, not only blocking, but especially receiving, and with his yards after the catch, his kind of his physical power, his strength, his ability to run through guys, run over guys, drag guys, and get up and just be so excited. He's really kind of the king of enthusiasm within the locker room, and just a great, rambunctious kid. Had a chance to meet him last year and saw him the other day, and he's just very respectful. Great guy, loves playing the game, and I think that the love of the game comes out on Sundays when you watch him play, and so it's great. The position is definitely being impacted by his play.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be a lot of fun to watch, certainly on Super Bowl Sunday. George Kittel. Brent Jones is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. It's been, which is insane to me, 25 years that the Niners last won a Super Bowl. You were on that team in 1994. You beat the San Diego Chargers. You went down to Miami, of all places. Let me ask you what that week was like. Obviously, a lot has changed in 25 years, but even then, it was still a big deal. I mean, this is, Super Bowl 29 we're talking about here, so there have been 28 other Super Bowls. What was that week leading up to the game like for you? Could you have a normal week, or was that simply just impossible?
I actually think the 49ers had a pretty good structure in terms of how we had attacked the week. And I think a big part of that was because of their success in the 80s, and I was around for a couple of those Super Bowls. And so how do we travel Super Bowl week? How do we prepare? How do we, maneuver in and out of the hotel? Interestingly enough, we had an off night or two, and I think one or two of the guys decided to stay out a little extra late one night, and there was a rehashing at our meeting in the morning, and we ended up asking the coach to leave and the players only, and a couple of guys got into it. Jerry Rice leading the charge about, hey, this is how we prepare for games. This is how we win Super Bowls. We can't afford even little slip-ups to take our focus off the task at hand. And that's just, when you get there, I think sometimes teams are so enamored with being there that you forget that you still have to win that final game. And so there was a little hiccup during the week, but nothing that threw us off. And we had a great week of practice. Sometimes you can just tell the way practice unfoils during the week. It's kind of interesting. And I don't remember the 89 and 88 seasons as much, the practice. I'm sure it was intense. But 94 was as precise and perfect as it could be. And I think that was probably the most confident we were heading into a Super Bowl game against the Chargers. We had played them during the year. And so it ended up being great. Not too many distractions. But, Jason, thinking back, I laugh because the internet wasn't even happening then.
Yeah.
And so you can just imagine how the Super Bowl's blown up here in the last 25 years, and the amount of people covering it and the amount of discussion and news and information coming out. So it's a lot different than it used to be.
Absolutely. Now, you say you don't remember the practices as much, but that first Super Bowl also played in Miami. For those that don't remember, that was the Super Bowl that Joe Montana threw the touchdown pass to John Taylor to beat the Bengals. You were just a couple years into league at that point. You weren't even, I don't believe, starting as the tight end on the Niners that year. But what do you remember about that Super Bowl? What sticks out?
So just the intensity of playing in a Super Bowl and what it's like as a young man. I mean, I was a kid that loved the NFL. My dad was a college quarterback and was drafted. Never played. He got hurt, but I grew up as a kid, from the time I could remember watching games and to see those locker rooms after a Super Bowl win and the celebrations and all that, and then to find yourself in that position. Unbelievably enough, I was the second tight end, and we'd run a lot of two tight ends that year. We practiced that play that John Taylor caught for a touchdown 4 times during the week. It was supposed to be me in the game. I was standing on the sideline. We didn't get the right personnel in. I remember Bill Walsh looking at me and saying, "Hey, we called 70 curl X up. How come you're not in there?" And I said, "We didn't call for that 2 tight end set." So, unbelievably, if you go back, and I don't know if it's even on all the film, but John Taylor was split out wide. Joe motions him inside to play the X. And it was one of the things about our offense. The receivers and the tight ends knew all each other's routes. And so John Taylor knew exactly what to do on that route. And fortunately it worked out. But man, I was thinking, yo, that was my play all week that was my play. Oh. And so, at the point that he caught it and we were going to win the game, I didn't care anymore.
Right. Exactly. You're happy. You're Super Bowl champs, but it's interesting to think back. I love that story, by the way. I don't think I'm a pretty good Super Bowl historian on some levels. I don't think I knew that story. And certainly that game I believe it was Bill Walsh's last game as coach, right?
Yes, it ended up being his last game, and very emotional afterwards. And of course, players didn't know that was going to be it, but it ended up being exactly that.
Amazing. Brent Jones is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. All right, we already talked a little bit about your faith in the beginning, but let's intersect the conversation even more with faith. Take us through being a believer and coming into the NFL, what that was like back in the late 80s, 86 you were drafted. In fact, you almost didn't even play. As far as I read, you had an accident. Is that right? In 1986 that almost limited your NFL career. And then you end up in San Francisco, and certainly it takes off and you have an amazing career. Talk about faith early on coming into the NFL and maybe relying on that faith as your NFL journey was just beginning.
Well, you know what, Jason, I certainly wouldn't have been on the precipice of even playing in the NFL were it not for my faith and God just directing my path and me, seeing an open door and taking the opportunity. But I was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a drunk driver hit my fiance and I coming down the wrong side of the road 2 weeks after the draft. And my fiance is now my wife. And so we've been through a lot together. And at the time, it was a pretty bad accident. I had a herniated disc in my neck. The Steelers, we were forthright with them, and they said, that's okay. They signed me anyway. And the doctor said it was going to be about 6 months. Probably we didn't need surgery, hopefully. And so about 3 months into it, I think the Steelers lost patience. They knew on the front end, but they decided to let me go, and it was devastating. And it's one of those things where at that low point in your life where you've, all of a sudden you've come to this point and God, how did this happen and why and wow and how? And, I think it's a great example of looking back over the years, and God said, basically, I have something even better in store for you. At the time, you don't necessarily know that, but I had the opportunity to come back, sign as a free agent with the 49ers. We used to have 130 guys go to training camp. There was 8 tight ends, and some way, somehow, I battled through that and, made the team by the skin of my teeth. And, it was great. And a year or two later, I was starting and stuck around for 11 years. So it was a blessing. Faith obviously was 100% of the reason. But going back, Jason, to the question, what was it like back then? Yeah. It wasn't cool to be a Christian back in 87. At all. In fact, you were under the microscope in the locker room. There was a lot of pressure. Hey, how do you act? How do you behave? How are you out on the field? And it was, I think maybe the old stereotype that, hey, all Christians are soft. And We had a good Bible study, a core of maybe 5 or 6 guys. Those first couple years, a lot of our offensive linemen. It was great to meet and to share and fellowship with those guys. But something started to happen. Mike Singletary and Reggie White started to speak out more about being a Christian and a stand-up guy. And thank God those were 2 of the toughest guys in the National Football League. And so being a Christian and being a soft Christian started to kind of melt away along with those guys. And interestingly enough, on a December night in 1990, for the very, very first time ever, 5 or 6 guys from our 49ers Bible study decided to let the world know that Christ was the most important thing in our lives. And we had the opportunity to post Monday Night Football against the Giants. Both teams, I think 10-1, 11-1, the obvious 2 best teams in football. We had an opportunity to kneel down and pray with a couple of Giants after a game, which had never been done. In fact, fraternization after games was typically frowned upon. We prayed together, and it made an impact, so much so that the league had notes in our lockers the following week saying, if you pray the following week, we're going to fine you $25,000. And when guys were making 100 or 150, that's a big number. And we just felt like God was telling us to keep doing it. And we did it again. And a couple weeks later, we had letters in our lockers saying, if you guys continue to pray, your owner will be fined $1 million.
Oh my gosh.
And so Guy McIntyre, our 7th year all-pro guard, went to our owner, Eddie DeBartolo, and talked to him about it. And Eddie said, I love what you're doing. You guys go ahead and keep praying. Don't worry about it. And interestingly enough, I had a call from Reggie White and saying, hey, I hear what you guys are doing out in San Francisco, and we want to be a part of it too. And the Giants kept doing it. And, nobody's really sure how it started, but the overflowing impact of that was all the teams were praying, Christians across the league, coaches eventually. Subsequently, a few years later, you'd see college teams doing it, high school teams doing it. And that was really the genesis of it, way back when.
Yeah, that's 30 years ago, coming up on 30 years that took place. It's kind of crazy to think about. And now, just watching an NFL game, even the Super Bowl, I remember even a couple years ago that the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and they made sure that their band of brothers got together and prayed at the 50, even though it's chaos when you win a Super Bowl.
It is chaos. You're right.
Right. It's mass chaos, but they made sure they found their guys, and they made sure they said a prayer. What was that like going through that? I mean, that's got to be, to say that you would be fined $25,000. I mean, back in that's a lot of money anyways, but thinking about that, like you said, when you're making $100,000, that's a ton of money. In the NFL, what were they just scared, you think, or afraid to have any kind of prayer or religion involved in their game?
I think that was it at the time. I think the ownership didn't want that. They didn't want, prayer or any religious type of actions going on at the game. And fortunately, throughout the course of several weeks, and certainly some of the high profile players that were praying as well, I think that they just felt like, this is probably not a good look for us to be contesting it. It's not talked about a lot. It wasn't written about, but that was the reality of the situation.
And I think, I've been a part of Sports Spectrum for 3 years now after working at ESPN, and I see football, I think more than any other sport, faith is a big part of the game. I mean, there's large amounts of guys now that are meeting at the 50. There's large amounts of guys now, 15, 20 guys from some of the teams players that I've talked to that are participating in Bible studies, talking to team chaplains and seeing, even the ones behind the scenes that maybe aren't at the 50, but that their faith is important to them and they want to partake in that. Football and faith kind of goes together even more now than it did then, right, Brent?
I really agree. And I think it certainly wasn't cool back then. And so you were certainly taking a risk by standing up for Christ, and, certainly a target for outside people to question you. And I think a lot of guys over the years maybe go out as, hey, maybe they're not even strong in their faith, but hey, if God's going to go ahead and bless me, I'll sneak out there, because what the heck? Right. That wasn't the case when we were going through it. It was just the guys that were truly committed, and you had to have the nerve, quite honestly, to stand up and do that and proclaim your faith. And I think while it's just a small symbol, getting together and holding hands and praying with the other team after the game, I think makes a huge impact for people that see it, for people that have seen it over the years, and just the spread like, wildfire, across all levels of the game has been pretty darn special. And I think football is one of the rare sports where not only is there a huge amount of teamwork involved and dynamics, but there's also the physical threat of the game, and you're taking a huge risk every time you play it. And I think there's a lot of guys that have probably come to that realization over the years, and certainly maybe faith has become part of their life because of the travails, the ups and downs of pro sports. But certainly to have strong team Bible studies and certainly the post-game prayer is a big deal in the National Football League.
So I looked it up. You were 134-41. And maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, in your career. You lost 41 games in the 11 years that you played with the 49ers and won 134. That's a lot of winning. But, I mean, it's a lot of winning, and it's 3 Super Bowls and a ton of success. But walk me through those early days. You're winning a lot of games. You're winning 2 Super Bowls back-to-back early on. You're around legends like Jerry Rice and Joe Montana. And then that Monday night, and this happens, and you go out there and you express openly about your faith. Does it open up doors for you to talk to some of these guys? And I'm not going to name names because I don't know who was and who wasn't or whatever, but did it open up doors for you to begin to have conversations about faith and say, hey, here's what we're doing, maybe even inviting a guy or two to a Bible study? Did you see that take place because of really that public display of your faith?
Yes. You know what, Jason, all the above. And so we had opportunities to invite more guys to Bible study, invite them to pray after the games. And I think one of the things that happens and people don't see is I think there's probably there's a pregame prayer in probably almost every team stadium. We used to get together. We kind of had an old locker room. We had a big shower. So we used to have the guys get together and pray. And I think as things move along, guys started to realize, hey, gosh, it's okay to sit down and clasp your brother's hands and be part of a prayer, whether you said a prayer or said anything or not. I just think that it bound the team together, and I think it gave us a lot of opportunities. And interestingly enough, there was a couple guys on our team I'd invite to Bible study, and a lot of guys kind of would shake it off. No. And that's okay. They subsequently became Christians after their time in the NFL, and you know what, God has a plan for each and every one of us, and that was still, I think the time was honored, and so it's a it's a great outcome to know that. I think it's a special time and place, and it's just a sliver of time. And I think it's sometimes when you're young, you think you're going to play forever and all these, you're going to remember all these things. And now, like you said, it was 25 years since our last Super Bowl, and since I played in a Super Bowl, and it's amazing to hear that number. It sounds like, holy cow, am I that old?
Well, you also said before we started taping, and even after, about your grandchild and that you're a grandpa, and I was like, Brent Jones can't be a grandfather because that makes me old, because I remember watching Brent Jones playing every year in an NFC playoff with the Niners. So there's no way that he could be a grandfather. Now, that's just me thinking, right?
Well, thank you. It's true. And, it's funny, you mentioned that the playoffs in the record. Yeah, I to be honest, I didn't know my record, but I do remember this, Jason. I played in 7 NFC Championship games in my 11 years, and we lost 4. And I remember the 4 that we lost vividly, sometimes more than the ones that we won, because you're so close to achieving that goal, and just to be right on the cusp of going to the Super Bowl. And I think that's the toughest game to lose. And I've never lost a Super Bowl, but I've talked to people, and yeah, it's tough, but you're there, you're at the dance. And I think the one before is always the toughest one to lose. And so it brings back a lot of great memories. And truly, we had a successful team, but it's tough to get all the way and win it all. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Which one was the most painful when you think back? As you said, there's 7 of them.
Yes. So by far, I hate even reliving this one. In fact, the first time I watched it was a couple years ago when I was yelling at the TV.
I apologize that I had to
That's
ask.
okay. It was in this 1990 season, 91, we were going to win 3 in a row. It's never been done.
Yeah.
And we had it. Joe Montana got knocked out in the 4th quarter and broke his hand. It was ugly.
Against the Giants, right?
Yes, and in comes Steve Young like a deer in the headlights. I don't care what he says. He had no idea where he was and what he was doing.
Yeah.
And we got to 3rd down, and I was yelling at him what the coverage was. It was 3rd and 20, and we completed a 35-yard seam route or something down the middle. And there was 2:46 or something left in the game, and I dropped the ball. Was all excited. I never really said anything, and I walked by Lawrence Taylor and I said, "LT, I'm going back to the Super Bowl." And 1 minute later, we fumbled. The Giants drove 40 yards and kicked a field goal, and I wasn't going to the Super Bowl.
Oh.
And it was as painful as I just felt like we were the best team in the league. We had been, and it was kind of a fluky thing, and to this day, man, 3 in a row would have been great bragging rights.
Well, I remember being stunned as a fan, and I'm not a fan of the Niners or the Giants. In fact, I was just hoping for a good game, and it was. But I remember being stunned because I think, if I'm not mistaken, you come off back-to-back Super Bowls, you're playing at home. The Niners had to be favored by quite a bit in that game. The Giants weren't a flashy team. When you watched them, they were just a good defensive team that played solid, fundamental ball, but they didn't even score a touchdown in that game, and yet they still won. And I was stunned. I have to imagine as a player, it was kind of the same feeling.
Yeah, it was. That was the toughest one, and so much so that I was a kid that grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area playing for your local team, and I sat in the house for 2 or 3 weeks and wouldn't go to dinner, wouldn't go to the grocery store, wouldn't do anything.
Really?
My wife was starting to get worried about me. I just didn't want to go out and face the world, face the questions, face the music.
Yeah.
I was grumpy for a few weeks because time is short. You know how tough it is to get all the way there, and then to just kind of leave it on the grass there with the ball dangling. It's like, we had it. All we need to do is run out the clock.
Yeah.
So.
I remember it. Well, Brent Jones, this has been great, man. As we close in this time, this is a question we ask all of our guests here on Sports Spectrum. What's the great lesson when you look back that the Lord has taught you on this journey, both in football and in life? What's he teaching you? What's he taught you? When you look back, when you see where he's brought you today, what's the lesson that you say, yeah, God, that's the lesson?
I think we, as humans, tend to overreact to situations, and I know that I do, and I have. But if you put your faith in the Lord, and Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And I think trusting and all your heart are big examples of a commitment as followers of Christ. And trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, which I tend to do even nowadays. Like, okay, what is my perception of this? But acknowledge him, and he will make straight your path. And I look at my path, and it looks like it's been zigzagging all over the place. But to bring my path around, to have a platform to share Christ as a professional football player in your hometown, in your home stadium, in your college town where you grew up. I don't know that I would have ever, even dreaming big dreams as a kid, would have dreamt something that big. And so I think just trusting in him. that he's going to make straight your path. And I don't know that it gets any better than that.
Well, that's my life verse as well. So I was basically reciting it as you were reading it because that's been a verse that's been near and dear to my heart on my journey as well. Brent, this has been great, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime. All the best.
That'd be great, Jason. Appreciate all the time and attention. And man, you're fantastic. It's great to talk to somebody that not only has faith but knows the game, knows the history, and knows all the elements as well.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Brent. That was a treat for me. One of the amazing parts of the journey that I've had in this broadcasting world is to talk to some of the greats that I watched as a kid, and even into my teen years and into my 20s. And I didn't tell Brent Jones this, but as a Dallas Cowboys fan growing up and still to this day, I rooted very hard against him, let's just say, in those championship matchups between the Cowboys and the 49ers in the 90s. But man, was he good. I rooted against him, but you respect the heck out of what the 49ers were able to accomplish. And think about this. In the 11 years that Brent played, listen to the records of his teams. 13-2, 10-6, 14-2, 14-2, 10-6, 14-2, 10-6, 13-3, 11-5, 12-4, and 13-3. The worst season Brent Jones had as a NFL player with the Niners was 10-6. For other teams, winning 10 games is a very big deal. For the 49ers, that was a bad year, winning just 10 games. And the one year that they won 10 games back in 88, they actually went all the way to win the Super Bowl as well. So it is a treat and a lot of fun for me as a big football fanatic and a historian to look back and to talk to guys like Brent Jones about the game of football. And I love being able to intersect that with the world of faith. So many thanks to Brent Jones for joining us here, 3-time Super Bowl champion on Sports Spectrum. Many thanks to you for listening as well. Hit us up on our social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Simply search sports_spectrum. You can find us on our YouTube channel as well. And of course, all of our content can be found at sportsspectrum.com. That's our website. It's a great place to check out all sorts of content, archival content, podcasts, daily devotionals, all sorts of articles, especially a week like this week with the Super Bowl upon us. Check it out over at sportsspectrum.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Have a great rest of your day.